It was one of those rare lazy Saturday afternoons. My husband Mark had gone out to do some shopping, leaving me in the house to enjoy the peace and quiet. I didn't expect anyone to pass by, so when the doorbell rang, it took me by surprise. When I opened the door, there he was, David, my husband's closest friend. He was family, or at least someone who had been there for years, with tears in his eyes, but today there was something different in his eyes, something that I couldn't put my finger on it. "Hey, Mark isn't home right now," I said, leaning on the door frame. "He didn't tell you?" David chuckled slightly. "Yes, he mentioned that he was ahead of the Wanderers. I just told myself that I'd go and wait for him if it's okay with you." I hesitated for a second, but there was no reason to turn it down. After all, we'd spent countless times together in Mark's absence, and it had never been a problem before. "Sure, come in," I said, stepping aside as David walked past me in the living room. I just couldn't shake that strange, uncomfortable feeling that had creeped in when I'd seen him standing at the door. Maybe something in the way he looked at me, or maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But anyway, I threw it away and decided to make the most of this company that was not welcome. I offered him a drink and we sat down, starting with the usual. Work, the weather, how Mark had driven me crazy lately with all these projects around the house. David laughed, but then his tone changed to more serious. "You know, Sarah," he began, lower voice than before, "I've always admired how strong you are. You handle everything so well even when Mark is caught in his own world." The compliment caught me off guard. David had always been kind-minded, but this was different. There was a weight behind his words that wasn't there before. "Thank you, David," I replied, trying to keep things light. "It's not always easy, but I guess it's marriage, right?" He nodded, but his gaze lingered on me for a moment longer than he should have. I could feel the tension in the room. It started to build up, a tension that made me uncomfortable, but couldn't distract me from the curiosity that was gushed out in me. My ringtone on the coffee table broke the silence. It was a message from Mark saying that he would be out a little longer than expected. I put the phone back on and looked at David, whose expression had changed once more. There was something in his eyes that made my stomach turn. "I guess you'll have to keep me company a little longer," I said, forcing myself to smile, though my heart was pounding for reasons I couldn't. David leaned forward in his chair, holding on closer. "I don't mind," he said in a low voice. "In fact, I wanted to talk to you about something personal." I blinked, not knowing where it was going. "Staff? What you mean?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair, seemingly searching for the right words. "It's just Sarah. You were never just Mark's wife to me. I feel like we got that connection, even though we've never talked about it before." My breath got stuck in my throat. It certainly wasn't where I expected the conversation to go. We'd always been friendly, but this, it was different. David was venturing into dangerous territory, and I wasn't sure how to navigate it. "What do you say, David?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He looked me straight in the eye, his eyes full of something I couldn't identify. Regret, perhaps, or nostalgia. "I think you know what I mean, Sarah." The room seemed smaller, looking heavier as David's words floated between us. I looked at him, trying to figure out what was going on. We had always been close, but I never imagined that he felt this way, or worse, that he would ever express it. My heart raced, but not excitement. It was fear, confusion, and disbelief at the same time. "David," it sighed, "I don't know what to say." I stammered suddenly, feeling very vulnerable. "You're Mark's best friend. We're all family." David sat down in his seat, looking down at his hands. For a moment, he seemed to regret what he had said, but the tension remained. I couldn't move, locked in the strange atmosphere that had taken hold of our house. The walls seemed to close in around me. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "I didn't mean to make you feel uncomfortable. I just had to say it. I've been keeping it for so long. Maybe I shouldn't have come today." I bit my lip, not knowing how to respond. Part of me wanted to tell him to leave, to end the conversation before it escalated further, but another part, a dangerous, was curious about where it was going. Not because I wanted it to happen, but because I needed to understand how we got there, how something so innocent had turned into this. Before I could say a word, David stood up and started pacing around the room. The movements were restless, and in his eyes, I knew he was disturbed by something. I never wanted things to get complicated between us, he continued, almost to himself. But there were moments when I thought you felt it too. How did it feel? I asked, although by his gaze I feared that I already knew the answer. He stopped pacing back and forth and turned back to me with that raw intensity. The connection, the unspoken connection, the way we shared looks across the room, or how you laugh at my jokes, when no one else would have done it. I know it sounds crazy, Sarah, but there were times when I thought that maybe you see me the way I see you. His words poured down against me like a wave, and during those seconds, I got lost in the tide of confusion. Was he imagining this? Or had there been subtle moments, which I hadn't even noticed, when the lines had faded? I got up, needing to clear the fog in my head. David, you can't do that, I said, my voice a little trembling. I never intended to train you. If there was anything, if I had ever given you the wrong idea, I'm sorry, he approached, his eyes searching mine as if he were looking for something, a sign of reciprocity, an indication that I wasn't pushing him away. I know, Sarah, I know you didn't, but now that it's here, I can't take it back, and neither can you. My pulse quickened as the tension between us became palpable. I could feel his presence, so close, and it me off. I didn't know whether to take a step back or stand my ground. The lines between right and wrong were suddenly too thin to see. Suddenly, the sound of Mark's car pulling up in the driveway like a clap of thunder. David and I froze, the moment between us shattered by the sound of reality crashing again. He's back, I said, barely above a whisper. David took a step back, rubbing the back of his neck in frustration. I should go, he whispered in a low voice, his voice contradictory. I nodded, unable to speak. I watched as he walked over to the door, paused for a moment before finally reaching out, turning the handle and exiting. When the door closed behind him, I breathed, feeling the weight of what had just closed had happened, settling on me. Mark walked in seconds later, oblivious to the storm that had just passed through our house. Hey, baby, David was there, he asked casually, glancing at the empty living room. Yes, I said, forcing a smile. He had just left. The days that followed seemed surreal, as if I was living in two separate realities. On the surface, everything was normal. Mark went about his usual business, oblivious to the undercurrent the tension swirled under our house. But inside, I was a mess. Every time I thought about that afternoon with David, my mind was replaying it like a kind of broken record. What he had said, his eyes, the quiet intensity between us. I avoided David as much as possible. Whenever Mark suggested inviting him over for dinner or mentioned plans that included him, I found a reason. I wasn't ready to face him again, not after what had happened. But avoidance exhausted me, and worse, it was dishonest. Mark didn't know anything, and I couldn't bear the guilt of hiding something from him, even if nothing had actually happened. But the more I tried to push everything away, the more he slipped in my thoughts, invading even the simplest moments. One night, Mark and I sat on the couch and watched a movie. My phone vibrated. I picked it up absent-mindedly, expecting it to be something routine. But when David's name appeared on the screen, my heart skipped a beat. We need to talk, please. I watched the message, my pulse quickening. How could he still want to continue this after all? I thought that by now he would have given up. No, he wasn't finished. The tension between us had not been resolved, and now he was pushing. To find out more, what's new? Mark asked, his eyes still fixed on screen. Well, it wasn't like he knew there was a maelstrom brewing inside me. Nothing important, I answered quickly, locking my phone and putting it face down. My hands were sweaty, my chest clenched with panic and guilt. But the message stayed there, making a hole in my mind for the rest of the evening. I couldn't focus on anything, only the fact that something was out of my control. David wasn't going to back down, and I had no idea how to deal with it. Without destroying the fragile balance of our lives later that night, after Mark had fallen asleep, I got out of bed and grabbed my cell phone, rereading David's message repeatedly, knowing all the time that I shouldn't respond, that I just had to leave him alone, let him go, hope that he would find someone else. But deep down, I knew it wasn't going to be that easy. The situation had crossed a threshold. There was no turning back without facing it head-on. Taking a deep breath, I finally typed my answer, We can't talk. This must stop, David. I hit send and immediately felt a knot forming in my stomach. Would that be enough? Would it leave him alone? Or if I had just made things worse, I didn't have to wait for an answer. It's not that simple, Sarah. I can't forget it. I need to see you. My chest swollen. I couldn't believe this was happening. How had things escalated so quickly? I thought about waking up. Mark told him everything, but that thought terrified me. I wasn't ready for it. I didn't know how he would react, and I wasn't sure I could handle the fallout. The other message came when I looked at the phone tomorrow. Meet me once after that. If you want to never see me again, I'll respect it, but I need to see you. My hands were shaking when I read the message. I knew that meeting him would be a mistake, but a part of me needed to turn the page, a kind of finality to this tangled mess. That would probably mean being able to put an end to all of this, and hopefully be enough to stop the rising tension before it finally exploded into something worse. I looked at the ceiling in a dilemma. The next day, I was on edge, caught between what I knew was right and the attraction of something much more dangerous. My mind was a jumble of possibilities. None of them were good. I tried to do the things I did any day: clean the house, run errands. Everything around me was a blur, and nothing could stop me from thinking about this afternoon's meeting with David. Even the small things seemed impossible under the weight of the impending reunion. Then, at noon, he sent me another message naming me a time and a place, a quiet cafe on the outskirts of town, far enough away that we couldn't show it to anyone who knew us well enough to put two and two together. It was secret, wrong, but something inside was pushing me to go for it. Maybe this meeting would finally break the tension, the secrets I had been holding on to. Maybe after today, I can get back to my life and never think about it again. I didn't tell Mark where I was going. Instead, I made up a quick excuse to run errands and left the house. My heart was pounding as I walked to the cafe. My mind whirled with contradictory thoughts. I knew I shouldn't. I couldn't shake the need to move on. The moment I walked through the door and saw David sitting in the back corner, I knew there was no turning back. He looked up as I approached. Relief mixed with something darker, more complicated. I sat across from him, hands clasped in my lap, trying to control my emotions. "Thank you for coming," David said, his voice low. He seemed tired, exhausted, as if he hadn't slept since we last met. "I don't know why I'm here," I answered honestly, my voice tense. "What do you think we should talk about?" I said that could not happen again. David sighed and sat down in his chair, his eyes searching mine. "I know what I said the other day took me in a strange direction, and for that I'm sorry, but the truth is this, Sarah, I just can't walk away from this without knowing how you feel. You tell me right away that there's absolutely nothing between us, and that I'll leave and never bother you again. But if there's even a small part of you that feels the same way, I need to know." That my heart was beating in my chest, the weight of his words crashing on me like a wave. It was the moment when he asked me to choose, a choice that would destroy or save everything. I took a deep breath, my voice trembling as I spoke. "David, I can't deny that what you said shook me. It made me question things I never thought I'd do, but I love Mark. He's my husband, and we've built a life together. Whatever you think there is between us, it can't happen. That will not happen." David's expression hardened for a moment. He nodded after a moment, then slowly. "I see," he said softly. His voice was resigned, tinged with disappointment. "I guess I was wrong." Then the silence between us was long, really long and uncomfortable. I felt this strange mix of relief and guilt of knowing that I had done the right thing, but underneath it was this realization that it wasn't over, not really. David can accept my words, but the impact of what happened would hang in the air between us forever. "I'm so sorry, David," I said softly, feeling the weight of everything that hasn't been said. He looked at me with tired eyes. "You don't have to apologize, I'm just." I needed to hear it, I needed to know. I nodded as I got up from the table. "I think we both need to move on." He didn't say anything, he just watched me walk away. My heart was heavy, but my mind was clearer than it had been in days. Outside, the fresh air hit me, and tension finally began to seep out of my body, the knot in my chest loosening as I walked back to the car. I haven't looked back. I couldn't. That evening I went back to Mark's, who welcomed me with his usual warmth. We had dinner, laughed at something stupid he had seen on the internet, and we fell back into our usual rhythm. Still, something in me had changed. I had come close to a line that I never thought I would cross too closely, and it terrified me. Even though I knew I had taken the right path in the end, the fact that I seriously considered meeting David filled me with shame. Now, sitting next to Mark on the couch, I knew I was watching guilt, no matter how small, fester. I needed to free myself from this feeling of guilt. I needed to be honest about it with myself and with Mark, but tonight was not the night of confessions. Tonight, I would simply be grateful that I chose not to destroy everything I held dear. David's shadow still lingered in the back of my mind, but I knew that what had almost happened was over. It had to be the case.